Adam Schefter has reported we have our first scheduled interview for the Bills. It is Anthony Lynn, former Bills assistant head coach and current Commanders run game coordinator. Anthony Lynn, Schefter...
interim coach for the Bills, too, one game in 2016.
Yeah, Schefter says he was a finalist for the Buffalo head coaching job in 2017 that went to McDermott. He is scheduled to interview with the Bills. He was the Chargers head coach from in 2017. They went 33-31 in the midst of the relocation to L.A. Since then, he's been under Dan Campbell, Kyle Shanahan, and now Dan Quinn. So Anthony Lynn to interview for the position. 803-0550, Jeremy and Joe, good morning. Press conference, 10 a.m. We talk on Wednesdays with Joe Marino, usually 8 o'clock. We're going to do it right here. Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast, and many other elements of Bills coverage at thejoemarino.com. Joe, good morning. How are you today?
Hey, good morning, guys. I'm doing well and hope you are.
Head spinning, right? We're waiting for candidates. We finally have one here in Anthony Lynn. And I wonder, Joe, if we could get your thoughts. You know, you do Locked On NFL scouting. You're not just watching the Bills. You're watching the league. You know these names, these assistants. Do you have a name for the next coach that you like the most right now as an idea?
Yeah, I think there's two, Jeremy, and I'm really going to start my efforts to unpack, candidates following this press conference today. I really kind of want to hear what they have to say and see if that can steer me in the right direction. And so, absent of having done a really deep dive, the two names that really stand out to me are Davis Webb, who's the passing game coordinator for the Denver Broncos, and Clint Kubiak, who obviously has done a good job with the Saints, the Saints last year and Seattle this year with that offense. And I just feel like stylistically, kind of what he does with the quarterback, what he does with tight ends, would really mesh well with a lot of the infrastructure that's in place with Buffalo's offense. Plus, you kind of get that really fresh, new voice in the room. But the name that I continue to really find myself intrigued with is Davis Webb. And Jeremy, you and I have been talking about, if the Bills were to move on from Joe Brady, and the name I always bring up is Davis Webb. Yeah. Well, all right, we got a bigger conversation to have. But if that's the offensive mind that really intrigues me, and it's not like it's a foreign idea for him to be getting head coach interviews. I mean, he's been talking to other teams, and obviously there's a great relationship with Josh Allen. Everybody I've ever spoken to about Davis Webb just raves about the guy. And so, I am not going to be afraid of the, 30s, not a ton of experience, but like maybe you do. How do you not get curious about that itch that might be the next Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan type guy? And I think, Davis Webb and Clint Kubiak certainly fit that profile. And so they're guys that I'm pretty interested in. I know that neither one has head coaching experience, and that's potentially a concern. But I think that bright offensive mind would be a welcomed addition to what this team kind of needs.
Joe, how much of a concern when a guy is young or doesn't have play caller experience or even head coaching experience, how much of the concern for you is what kind of staff can this person build? Like, does Davis Webb have names at defensive coordinator he feels like he could get in the building? If the Bills are, of course, they're going to overhaul their defense here, right? There's going to be a different style of defense ultimately that they play.
Yeah, I think that's a fair question, and I think you are happy that he's had the experiences he's had in Buffalo with the Giants, with Denver the last few years. Of course, the playing career as well, where, through that, I'd like to think that he's met a lot of people, right? It's like, what's your Rolodex like? I think it's a really fair question to talk about, getting that staff piece right, because we've seen offensive-minded coaches struggle with that, just like we've seen defensive-minded coaches struggle to get the right offensive mind. But while he's 30 years, Davis Webb in particular, 30 years old, he's been in the league since 2017 and kind of bounced around a little bit. And so I'd like to think those exposures positions him well to have some contacts, and hopefully the draw of Josh Allen is quite a big one for anybody that wants to step over. I guess that you do have the dynamics of the Bills coaching staff I'm sure a lot of them are technically still under contract. And so there's maybe some in-house people that you would look at, but that would be a big part of what Davis Webb would need to come and show in an interview is what his plan is for that side of the ball.
Joe Marino with us on the Wester Hotline. Joe, if it were, again, as you mentioned, like the press conference later today, I'm waiting to hear how much of the blame for this season or past years being puts on the defense, which he has done a little bit of, or even a lot of in the last couple of years. I guess if they were to go with a defensive coach, like how would that sit with you? Would you feel like that's a mistake?
I've been somebody who pushes back on not being open to defensive-minded head coaches, but ultimately for this Bills situation, I do want them to hire an offensive-minded head coach. And the parallel that I find myself going back to, I know that people want to bring up, Tony Dungy to the Colts or John Gruden to the Bucs, and they got over the hump. What I go back to is finding Josh Allen, his Mike Shanahan, the John Elway arc, where it was, 9 or 10 years of Dan Reeves, and they went to 3 Super Bowls, and they had 6 playoff runs, and they lost all of it. And then, of course, they had the 2 years of Wade Phillips, right? That's what we want to avoid. And then they get the Mike Shanahan piece, and I think he coaches them for 4 years and wins 2 Super Bowls. And so I want for Josh Allen to find that guy that he can align with for the rest of his career and do the stuff that we've been hoping he would have done by this point. And so with that in mind, I find myself way more interested in the offensive minds. Although when I zoom out and I talk in a vacuum, I am not against defensive-minded head coaches. I just don't think it's the right idea for this team right now.
So if they do go that way, how about a name there? Like, right, you said Kubiak and Davis Webb. Jesse Minter, Brian Flores. Are those the 2 guys at the top of the pecking order on the defensive side?
I guess. Those are just not needle-moving names for me. You think about Brian Flores and the collaboration issues that he had in Miami. I would be nervous about that. And, he's a guy that I love that he's had some experience and he's expanded his, Rolodex as a guy that was in New England forever. And now he's been in Pittsburgh and Minnesota. I think that's been helpful for him. But the lack of collaboration in Miami really concerns me. And then, Minter, he's certainly a type of guy that deserves some of these conversations, but I can't get excited about that for the Bills based on what I think the team needs.
Yeah.
I don't want that revolving door at offensive coordinator moving forward. I think they need to get their guy for Josh and go, maximize the rest of his career.
Looking at the future, Joe, we'll have conversations about free agents and draft picks and all that. Where do you land on the big picture about how good the roster is? Is it being overblown? How many holes they have? Like this idea that the Bills are, or I shouldn't say the Bills are selling this. Ian Rappaport saying many around the league think the roster is stocked with talent. The idea, the reporting out there that McDermott said he had concerns about the roster and that didn't sit well with the owner and with the GM. Where do you ultimately land on the state of the roster, how much work has to be done, and whether or not it is up to what it should be?
Yeah, it's a great talking point. I think I'll start by saying this. I don't think that the Bills have an amazing roster, but I do think that it had a roster that was capable of going all the way. I don't look at the New England Patriots and think to myself, oh my God, just brimming with talent all over the place. They need upgrades at receiver, and they need upgrades on their offensive line. They don't have edge rushers, right? They have a really kind of hodgepodge group of linebackers and safety. Like there are issues on that roster, and credit to them, they've taken advantage of their opportunities. But they're 4 quarters away from going to the Super Bowl in a game I think most people expect them to win. And so I hear that, but I don't know that it's an excuse for where this team wanted to go. All right, so I think you can kind of look at both sides of that. Then the hard part for me, Jeremy, is, all right, we look at this roster and we feel like there are some deficiencies on it. How do you possibly sort through which players are there because of Bean and which players are there because of McDermott, right? That's the blurred line that's going to be impossible for everyone to really settle in on, because you could say, well, Bean needs to get more talent. Well, what if he's truly supplying Sean McDermott for what he's been wanting and it's just not the right stuff? So that's where this is going to get really hard for me to differentiate and assess blame. But I think you can look at some archetypes defensively with certain positions that were troubling. I think you can look at maybe the offensive side of the football. And, for as good as the run game is and how important I think it is, the Bills should not be the most run-aggressive offense in the NFL with Josh Allen as the quarterback. How much is that on Sean McDermott versus Joe Brady versus Brandon Beane and what he supplied. There's so many blurred lines here that make it very difficult. But I go back to this New England team, and I don't know that there's a strong case that they're more talented than the Bills, and they're sitting in the spot that Buffalo wishes they were right now.
Right, that's right. I wonder specifically, Joe, about the defensive line. I saw a crazy stat that their defensive ends don't have a sack in one of these playoff losses since the 2020 AFC Championship game. That position, I don't think anyone thought Bosa had a good day on Saturday, maybe even a terrible day, and Rousseau doesn't have big plays in these games. Is there any room for you on something about McDermott's defense? If they were to change just defensive coordinator even, that they could get better results out of those players, and that any of the defensive line woes in the playoffs is something about McDermott's defense?
Are they too invested in guys that set the edge as opposed to whatever?
I don't know.
Finishers, pressure players versus sack artists. I think there's probably a conversation to be had there. I mean, you can't look at 7 playoff runs under McDermott with Josh Allen, 8 total, and feel like they've gotten what they need out of that defensive line in general. And I do think there's some stylistic choices there with them kind of wanting to be a complementary defense where the pressure, the rush complements the coverage, and you're of course you'd like to get sacks, but ultimately you want pressure and forcing quarterbacks into decisions that they don't really want to make, or forcing them to make throws that are harder to make. Right, so there's some stylistic choices there, and maybe that is a problem where if quarterbacks kind of know that, hey, they're not going to get quick pressure, they don't have real one-on-one battle winners, but if we can hang in here and just let it play out, we're going to find some space. We just got to hit throws, and they do, right? I mean, they just do. And so, I think those stylistic frustrations that influence roster decisions, could be something that changes moving forward that leads to a better result in the postseason.
Joe Marino joining us on the Western Hotline of Locked On Bills. Joe, finally, you got to pick. I mean, I think you think New England's going to win the AFC Championship game. NFC Championship game, who do you like? Should we be rooting for the Rams so they can talk to Clint Kubiak sooner?
Sure. You should.
Right. Okay.
But what's hard about that NFC game is I just wish the Rams were playing better. They're just not.
Right.
But Seattle's a team that, defense is unbelievable, but they don't consistently run the ball well, and they're pretty high turnover prone team, and Sam Darnold playing through an oblique. He's been a kind of a funky quarterback in big moments. So I kind of like the Rams to kind of leverage the inconsistency of the Seattle offense, maybe get some takeaways and win the game. So I think it's going to be Patriots-Rams.
All right. Thanks, Joe. We'll talk again.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Joe Marino, Locked On Bills podcast. Find everything he does at thejoemarino.com. All 22 breakdowns, all the good stuff. And I agree. In terms of what we think our top candidate might be, we might find out a little bit of information today at the press conference. A 10 a.m. presser from One Bills Drive. Sal will join us in the 9 o'clock hour, a bit of a scene setter, and then we'll carry the press conference afterward. Sal will join us from there. We'll kind of wrap it up, so we'll stay a little bit late for you.